Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 54, and today I'm here with Bari Tessler talking about money healing. Bari is a financial therapist, mentor, coach, mamapreneur, and the writer and founder of The Art of Money. She has guided thousands of people to new, empowered, and refreshingly honest relationships with money through her nurturing, body-centered approach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. If you are loving the Sage Family Podcast, then become a part of it through Patreon, where you can support these important conversations, help make this show great, and get rewards doing it. Rewards like the 8 Secrets to a Nourishing Morning Routine workbook. A morning routine might seem like such a small thing, but to proactively meet your self-care needs on the front end of your day is game-changing. And there are a few elements that I have found to be key in changing the entire tone and feel of your day that I walk you through in this workbook. Especially right now, when so much of life feels beyond our control, taking full ownership of your morning routine feels radical and therapeutic. So head on over to patreon.com/Sage Family and join the Sage Family Patreon community, where awesome supporters like Harbor Ray, thank you Harbor Ray, enjoy a monthly video Q&A with yours truly. Our adventure this week was my birthday trip. Those of you who have been listening for a while know that every year for my birthday, I have an adventure someplace new. And my birthday gift from my husband is that he handles all of the prep and planning. This time around, we drove up north to the small town of Bellingham, stayed in a charming old historic home, enjoyed all the nature adventures, including a day in the snow in North Cascade National Park, and ate all the yummy food at a bunch of new restaurants. Food, nature, and my people, a perfect birthday for me. And coming off this lovely trip, our little obsession is our winter gear. It was cold and rainy every day of this trip, but we were perfectly cozy and content in our base, warmth, and waterproof layers, which prompted me to completely update a post I have on that details each item of our winter gear. And you can see that at rachelrainbolt.com/winter-gear. The right winter gear can be an investment, but if the natural world around you is your classroom, consider this your tuition. In Sweden, they say that there is no bad weather, just bad dress. And entering winter during a pandemic, this has never felt more relevant. Getting outside is essential, and you can feel warm and dry no matter how cold and wet the weather is. If you want to see photos and videos of our trip, then head on over to sage.family on Instagram and follow along. Before we move into my conversation with Bari, I want to emphasize that word conversation. Nowhere in the verbiage for this podcast will you see or hear me use the word interview, because I am not a journalist and I have no desire to be one. I have a lot of experience and insight that I want to share with you, but rather than just recording myself talking for half an hour, I invite thought leaders I admire over to share in conversations as friends that I wholeheartedly believe others would enjoy and benefit from listening in on. I want you to feel like you're sitting around the fire with us as we talk about this topic that we share a passion for. I genuinely like being in connection with these remarkable humans, and what you hear is an authentic conversation that springs from that joy. While I recognize that my sound leveling isn't perfect, I sometimes interrupt when I get excited, and I definitely laugh a lot. This is me, showing up as my whole, honest, and imperfect self, and I will continue to do so long as the hundreds of thousands of you listening and leaving 5-star reviews and sending me emails of gratitude and sharing on social media and supporting the show through Patreon continue to find it helpful. If I'm not your cup of tea, that is truly okay. You are welcome to move on from this free content that I work very hard to provide and find a better fit. If the flavor of this show is for you, I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for not just listening, but taking all of these conversations to heart. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. I read Bari's book and really appreciated the holistic narrative and mindfulness elements that she brought to the relationship we have with money. I'm really looking forward to sharing a conversation with such an insightful and experienced woman who shares my hippie therapist vibe. Welcome to the show, Bari.
Thanks so much for having me, Rachel. I'm happy to be here.
Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about and how you came to this work?
Sure. So in this moment, I am approaching my 52nd birthday.
Happy almost birthday.
Well, thank you. I'm getting there. I still have a little bit, but it's approaching. And I'm an older mom. So I have a 12-year-old son. I had him 4 months shy of my 40th birthday. And I've been with my husband. We will be approaching our 20th year anniversary in January.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I call myself a financial therapist. And I've been doing my financial therapy work for 2 decades. And a decade before that, I trained as a somatic therapist. So I spent my 20s in graduate school at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. And I really thought my themes would be couples and intimacy and body and food and sexuality and sensuality and grief and death. I think I hit all the topics that I was really into in my 20s. And my student loan came due when I was 28. And that was a huge moment. That was a moment when I looked back at my life and said, wait a second, how am I going to pay this back? I was making, with a master's degree, $11 an hour as a counselor, social worker. How the heck am I going to pay this back? And wait a second, did I receive any financial education in graduate school training to be a therapist?
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything in undergrad when I was studying history? No. Anything in high school? I remember an accounting class. What about my family? I grew up with entrepreneurs. So there was some indirect teachings, certainly, but not direct money teachings, and that's part of my money story. So it all led me to having, a total freak out moment of either I'm running away forever and not going to deal with this or pay this back, or I'm going to look at this, and really face it and learn everything that I can about my own relationship to money, emotionally, practically, psychologically, spiritually. And I wound up learning bookkeeping. I learned about QuickBooks, and that's a whole story in itself, but it led me to create a bookkeeping business for a few years for other therapists and coaches and artists. I was between the age of 28 to 32, so I wasn't ready to hang my shingle as a therapist. And when it came to bookkeeping, people didn't even know I had a master's in psychology. They just threw their bookkeeping at me. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And they were just so thrilled. And I always say I learned more during those years about people's relationship to money than maybe if I was, doing private sessions. I saw everything by doing their books, what was important to them, where their values were, how they earned their money, what patterns around earning, and what their expense patterns were as well. I learned so much. So that all led to starting integrating my background in psychotherapy and all of the practical money management tools and bookkeeping that I was learning, and created my own methodology, which I now call Art of Money, but it's always been financial therapy, and started that in 2001 in tiny little groups of 10 people over and over and over. And now in 6 weeks, which I can't believe I used to teach this work in 6 weeks, but I did. And that's how I began. And now I teach about 500 students each year from around the world in a year-long program. And I live in Boulder, Colorado. That's
That's you in a nutshell. There's so much brilliance in your story, and I think you filled this financial therapy niche that you've created, really filled in this giant chasm of a gap that most people have one of those sort of come to Jesus moments like you described. Like I know I did, where I had student loans, graduated from graduate school, and rather than going into private practice, I decided to take a step away and be fully present in my mothering with my kids while creating something new where I could still contribute in meaningful ways to the outside world and fulfill the passions I had. But I totally had one of those moments where it's like, okay, so there's a $500 a month bill coming in for this degree, and I'm making almost nothing. How did they teach us nothing about, even when you look at it from like the private practice side, or just at no point in my education had I ever learned anything about money? And then as I started like diving into the self-study around this, it was glaringly, obviously, this huge highlight, exclamation point, underlined, bold thing where there are clearly all these deeper issues that are being triggered that are sabotaging people. It's math, but it's also so much deeper than that. And your work was really the first work I found that spoke to that.
Thank you. And yes, and I'll be doing this for years and years and years to come. Every year I find new topics or themes related to money, and I'm always finding new people to interview, and my husband's always amazed. It goes on and on and on, and it does. It really does. When I first had that epiphany, that moment of how am I going to pay this back, and what is my relationship to money, and I did not receive any training. My first moment was like just shame for, in myself. I'm not okay. I don't know how to do this. I wasn't good at math growing up, so therefore I can't do money or learn a bookkeeping system. None of that's true. But those are my first things or everyone else learned about this except for me, or if I'd come from a different family, then I would have learned this. And pretty quickly I started looking around at my community and realizing everyone, almost everyone that I knew from all different lineages and economic class backgrounds and income levels and on. We all did not receive a full financial education. We all maybe got parts or pieces of it. But I noticed pretty early on, like we all have strengths and we all have challenges around money. And so many of us do have a level of shame when we first approach it and think something's wrong with us. Everyone else knows how to do this, except for us. And that was, it was a great thing to experience personally, so I could see it and feel it and know how to work through it. And then, yes, you have to be brave to step in and start learning, what are your strengths around money? What are your challenges? What are your missing pieces? What are the set of emotions that come up for you?
Yes, I love that. And listeners of this show will be very familiar with that, bravely questioning all of those things and challenging all of those stories that are running through our minds. And I want to start with the shame piece, because that's such an important thing to unpack, because it really does sabotage a lot of people in their success with money. You say that we all have some form of money shame that weighs us down and undermines our success. What is it, and where does it come from? How does it show up, and how do we heal it?
Yeah, so those were like 4 questions in there. Okay, so let me break that down. I love it because I usually have 4 different answers or 4 different tangents. So number 1 is what I've already mentioned a bit, is that most of us did not receive a complete financial education. Most of us did also not receive a complete emotional literacy education. So that's why I love to teach financial literacy and emotional literacy together. So that's number one. We did not receive a full financial education from grade school on up in small increments, right? And then we all think as adults we should know this, and something's the matter with us. It's not, right? It's simply we weren't taught it. That's number one. Number two is that it's changing, but so many families still do not talk about money, don't know how to talk about money. It's still such a taboo topic. Again, no matter what economic class you come from, there are reasons in the family to not talk about money. So there's that. So we're supposed to be quiet about it, hidden, secretive. So there's that, those are two of the things or three of the things that lead into that we feel some level of shame around this area of life. Something's wrong with me. Everyone else knows how to do this. Everything I've already mentioned, like that's what shame is to me. I'm not okay. Something's wrong with me. And when we apply that to our relationship to money, those are some of the reasons why, I noticed I had this cloak of shame at the beginning. And then when I started doing my work, people would call me and say, talk to me. And it was such a big deal just to even get on the phone with me. And then sometimes it took months later before they were ready to like sit down in a class, with even a small group of people. It took some time to work that through, okay, to move through some of the shame. But know that it's pretty common. I want to talk about what are the money emotions that come up, but and shame is one of them, but it is kind of that initial thing of I'm not okay, something's wrong. Everyone else knows how to do this. Everyone else, if they came from a different family, learned this. So just something's not right about me in this area, or I feel stupid, right? Yeah. And so for me, the antidote to shame is the very first tool that whenever people say, what's the first step? And yes, I have a methodology that I teach in my book, in my year-long program, and it's 3 phases. It's money healing, money practices, and money maps. So 2 out of 3 of those are very practical. I love the numbers. I love the bookkeeping, which I never in my 20s or earlier would have imagined that I would have fallen in love with that or felt so empowered, right? Yeah. But it's possible if you have a good teacher and someone to hold your hand. But the beginning part is really understanding, so what the money emotions are, what your money story is, and how to work with shame, right? And other deeper things. But the first tool in there is what I call the body check-in. And it's one of those really simple tools that's really profound when practiced. All of my tools are like that. And it is step 1 for me. Before you get to the numbers or learn a bookkeeping system, step 1 is starting to practice a body check-in, which many of you probably already have a body check-in practice in every other area of your life. And so I'm inviting you all to do a body check-in practice around money as well. So there's daily money interactions when you're going to go online and look at your balances or look deeper into your transactions to see if anything's funny. When you're going to go have a money conversation with your spouse, with your parents, with your kids, with a client, when you're going to go do some online shopping or go do some shopping or make a money purchase, in small, medium, and large. Like there are daily money interactions that we're having. And so the body check-in is inviting ourselves to stop and pause and ask ourselves to notice what's going on a physical level, what's going on a sensation level, what's going on an emotional feeling level. We'll talk about that more. And what's going on with our breath. So where is our breath in our body? Is it up in our throat? Is it down more in our chest area? Is it down more in our belly area? And so that's it. That's a simple body check-in to start inviting yourself to do whenever you can remember it. Sometimes we remember it before we're going to have that money conversation. Wonderful. Sometimes we remember it in the heat of the moment when we're having lots of money emotions. Wonderful. And sometimes we remember to do a body check-in after as a debriefing, like how did that go? What could I have done better? What did I learn from that? So I say do body check-ins, as much as you can remember to do them. And it's a practice. So the more you do it, the more you remember to do it. It's not one and done. It's not you do a few and then you don't have any emotions anymore around money, that's not me, like I'm going to have emotions for the rest of my life. Many of you probably are too. Like that's good. It's okay. It's, do you have a tool to learn how to work with those emotions that are coming up in the moment, and so that you can learn how to name what the emotions are. You can learn how to sit with them, how to work with them in the moment. I can tell a story about that. And, it's awareness, as leads to understanding of the deeper patterns, the deeper money stories, what it reminds us of, our upbringing, what's working, what's not. And that leads to a change of patterns. So for me, the body check-in has always been the antidote to money shame. That may sound really simple, but it's something that if you practice daily, you start to understand more what the money emotions are. You understand more what your money stories, strengths, challenges are, patterns that aren't working, and you move into shifting. So that's a beginning answer to that.
Yeah, it's like a mindfulness exercise, right? Like we talk on this podcast a lot about mindfulness and parenting, where you can bring all of those unconscious drives and feelings and tensions and stories and thoughts and all that sort of up to the surface in the moment with that non-judgmental noticing of what's happening in your body and your emotions and your mind. And I love how you talk about bringing this to money, because a lot of us don't really think about applying it to this area. And yet this is a huge piece to lifestyle design. I mean, money is like to living the life of your dreams, which is something that we really talk about on this show a lot. So can you walk us through a full body check-in? Like imagine you're going on Amazon to make a needed purchase, and this is something that you can typically spend the rest of the day sort of kicking yourself over. How would you move through that body check-in process?
How about I tell a story of how I used it?
Love it.
And I think that within it, it will give you steps on how to do the body check-in and what comes next and walk you through. And if I need to be any more concrete, I will.
Perfect.
Okay. So this is a personal story that happened, 7 years ago at this point, 8 years ago. And I was with my family on the weekend. My son was about 4. And we were going to enjoy a cafe that was hosting live goats that you could pet and hang out with and enjoy your
awesome.
mochas. It was wonderful with a 4-year-old. Yeah. So we went there, and it was kind of in a new location. And so I didn't know where it was. And next to this place was a green car dealership, and it had these electric leafs that my husband had been researching for about a year. He had always dreamed of having an electric car since he was a kid, and he had been slowly researching every single aspect of the electric car, the Leaf, right?
He was drooling.
And he was drooling, exactly. So we show up, and we didn't know it was a used car, green car dealership that had 4 of the exact blue electric Leafs that he was drooling over, and dreaming of. And so, what do you think happens? We at some point he says, "Hey, honey, you want to take a test drive?" I was like, "Oh, I know what's happening," and sure, we go take a test drive. And then, the next thing, we're in the car dealership, and the car salesman, who's really lovely, is giving us like the whole rundown, of the cost and finance charges and monthly charges. And, and I start noticing that I'm hyperventilating a little bit. Not full panic attack, but just like I can tell my breath is moving up my chest into my throat. I can tell that my breathing is changing. I can tell I'm getting very nervous. And so I say to my husband and to the car dealer guy, "Give me a second." And I go to the bathroom, because the bathroom is a great place to do a body check-in.
Yes. Time out.
Time out. It's a time out for mom, you know? And so went into the bathroom, and I just started going through the body check-in, what's happening physically, in my body, what's happening. I can even feel it right now. My breathing speeding up a little bit or going higher. What are the emotions that are coming up? I was feeling anxious. And then I go into, what's the feeling? What does it remind me of? I don't like to make quick money decisions. Now, this was 8 years ago. It's changed. And this moment really helped me be able to move into make quicker money decisions when it was right. But in this moment, I was like, I don't like to make quick money decisions. This is making me nervous, and my breath is in my throat right now. And what's going on? And just so I just sat there feeling it, noticing where my breath was in my body, asking myself what it reminding me of, what's going on. And then I started asking if I could take my breath down. Like, can I try and calm myself down? Can I move my breath from my throat down into my chest, down into my belly? I took a little bit of time to do that. And, you don't know how to do that the first time you do a body check-in or any mindfulness practice. It takes time, right? Your initial thing may be, I feel anxious, I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how to calm my breath down. And so after more and more practice, you can learn more tools of how do you get your breath to come down to your chest, and then your belly. And so I did that for a little bit. And then, again, what does this remind me of? I don't like to make quick money decisions. I never have. It feels manipulative. I don't like these sales tactics. I had a little chat with myself about that. And then I said, okay, now what do we need to do next? And what I got was, okay, I'm ready to leave the bathroom. I'm done with this part of my body check-in. I'm going to come back. And I need to tell my husband that we need to have a small little money date right here, right now, a 20 to 30-minute money date in the car dealership. I wasn't going to make any big decision unless we'd sat down and really gone through what we call a money date. And so, again, the car guy, salesman guy was great. He knew what was going on. This is Boulder. He understood, we needed to have clear communication. And we went off into a corner, or he left us in the office, I can't remember, and gave us some space. And a money date for me is something that is another practice. And that happens more when we get to the money practices, that part of it. When you learn the whole methodology, it's not like step 1 or 2. You learn all these tools. And they all kind of integrate with each other. And a money date is another part of the money practices. It's the practical part, which is you sit down. It could be 5 minutes a day. It could be 15 minutes. It could be 30 minutes, twice a week, once a week. And you just ask yourself, what needs my attention right now around money? And I can talk more like money dates, like a bigger money date. I like the candles. I get out my chocolate, I play music, I get out my essential oils, all of it,
Yeah.
But they can also be really small or quickie money dates, right? And so my husband, this is another practice or tool that's simple, but when practice is really profound, and you don't get it right the first time, there may be screaming or fighting, for many of them as couples, certainly, until you figure out how to have a new kind of money date. So we had done that for a long time. And so when we're sitting in the car dealership on this day, our money date consisted of asking questions like, 1, do we have the cash flow for this? 2, is this money choice, this purchase, in alignment with our values? 3, is this money decision in this moment going to negatively impact our larger goal of buying a home one day? Those are the 3 ones that I remember the most, but there were other questions that we asked. And years ago, I didn't have any questions when I was going to do online shopping or go to the consignment store,
Yeah.
And most people come to me in my program, say, I don't even know if I can sign up for the program. I don't even know if I can afford it. I don't know what my numbers are,
Yeah.
And so you need to go through the entire 3 phases before you can even know how to make a good money decision, but they all add up. And I love having people start to make a list of questions when you're in the consignment store, like, do I need this? Do I want this? Will I really get the value out of this? Will I really enjoy it afterwards, right? And those are just a set of questions you go in. So those are the questions we asked in the car dealership, and we went through 20 to 30 minutes of really going back and forth. And once we answered all of those questions, I was pretty calm at that point. And we made a final decision. My husband had been researching it for a year. We answered all of those questions and we made a final decision and said yes. And we drove off the lot with that electric car that my husband had dreamt of, his entire life. And then it doesn't end there. It ends with like, you then a week later, do an evaluation of how does that feel now? Would we do anything differently? What did we learn? And so on. So that's gives you a little bit more of the money healing, money practices, money maps, but work like all in one moment, and just to complete that story, when I then went to that car a few years later, got hit, we were all fine, but it was totaled and I had to get a new car. And when I went into that moment, the same car dealership, this time it was a little used orange red Fiat. It's so cute. And, it was so much quicker. I didn't have the hyperventilating. I didn't need the body check-in in the bathroom. I went through my set of questions pretty quickly, my little money date, and drove off the lot in a very different way, but never could have had that experience if I didn't, fully practice all my tools in that first round and really learn how it can be different next time.
One thing in that story that sort of struck me, because we're going to talk about money stories, is what is this reminding me of? Like when you were in that body check-in, in that bathroom. Because in the book, you describe the experience of being asked to recall your earliest memory of money and then to, quote, slow that memory down, way, way down, and to feel into what decisions, judgments, and associations I had made about money back on that day. And this work of unpacking your narrative is so powerful. And you refer to the financial component of your narrative as your money story. How are we unconsciously playing out our money stories, and how can we edit them?
Yeah, edit's a good word, or rewrite them, right? Mm-hmm. But I like editing. I'm in the middle of creating my second book, and we're in the editing, pruning phase. So, money stories, one, just to clarify what they are, it's, again, all of our strengths, all of our challenges. A money story is formed during our upbringing and what we learned from our family of origin, parents, grandparents, whoever was raising us. Religion, spirituality plays a role. Lineage, heritage, economic class. Things that were passed to us consciously, unconsciously. I can remember my mom paying the bills at the kitchen table, the dining room table, and being very anxious or intense, anxious when she was doing it. I can remember that. So sometimes our money stories are formed even just by, it wasn't direct communication like from my mom to me, but I witnessed that. It's a memory, right? Yeah. And that imprinted on me. Or I can remember my parents fighting, or nervousness around they were entrepreneurs. And I remember I can tell that when they would talk about the numbers every day, they owned some bars, they were in real estate. So I remember moments like that, so it was never direct money teachings, but I can have memories of how they were talking about money with each other, right? Yeah. Money stories also are created based on our personalities, right? So I don't know if the Enneagram. Yes. Okay. So,
I'm a helper.
Okay. You're a helper. So yes. You're a 2.
Yes.
You're a 2. Okay. And so, right. So that plays a role. I'm in a family of 3 siblings. I'm the oldest. So my younger siblings, one of them was basically like saving from 5 years old. He had a bank, right? I had all these things that I was desired, like I wanted to buy my mom a ring at the school fair. I wanted to buy candy. There are always things I wanted. So I was more of a spender early on, right? So, but in the same household, we're literally just a few years apart. The 3 of us could not be different, right? So that's always fascinating to me. So that's kind of, our money stories are based on that. And some people call them money scripts in the financial therapy world. I've always called them money stories. And so, early on, we learn things positively, negatively, unconsciously, consciously, and then we form beliefs, ideas, decisions, thought patterns, just all sorts of patterns that we carry into our 20s and then beyond. And we'll just be playing those out until we, really dive in to those stories, that narrative, and really start to understand, what did we learn from our mom, positively or negatively? How are we similar? How are we rebelling? What about dad or mom and mom, whoever, or mom and grandparents, whoever was raising us? Like, what did you remember? What did you remember behind closed doors? And so I do like to go there, not to stay there that long, but I do like, oh, I'm sorry. I do like to go in there and just really start to see, like, what are the patterns? What do I remember? And what else do I want to say about that? I'll give a little example of, one thing and that is an exercise in the book. There are many prompts, to just, I love journal prompts. I think when we sit quietly and we ask ourselves questions, we get answers. We have memories. We have images, right?
Yeah.
We have a body sensation. And so I love journal prompts. And so there's some of them in the book. And one little personal story about this is that, my father and I are very similar, and we also had a lot of challenges. And I feel like I had to transmute a lot of our similarities that I felt were negative patterns. But one of our money dynamics was that I always felt controlled by him, and he around money. Well, in general,
Yeah.
and then also around money. And I hated it. And so we verbally sparred a lot, and I could stand up to him, even though I didn't enjoy that verbal sparring. But when it came to money, I felt so controlled. And there was like a combination. I grew up middle class. I grew up with generosity, certainly. And then all of these like inconsistencies, and then not direct teachings around money or what to do. So, for example, every week in college, I had to take a photocopy of my checkbook registers that were those paper registers. I don't know if how old you are.
Yes.
Okay. And so, and then send it to them, fax it to them, I guess, and then that was it. There was no discussion on what my limits were, how much I could spend, what he thought of it, what the parameters were. I was like, so why am I doing this step if there's no
Follow
teachings?
through.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
about the budgeting or limits or any of that. So there was just a lot of that. But so early on, maybe more in my teenage years, I made decisions based on my money dynamic with my father, that one, I was going to do business very different than he did and have a completely different set of values. Two, I was going to make my own money and never be dependent on a man. Three, I was not going to marry a man ever,
Yeah.
until I was much older, unless it was an equal partner, and I made all of these decisions, and, whether they were healthy, unhealthy, I made those decisions based on my money story and the dynamics that were happening. And then I got married at 35 and had a baby at 40, and chose a man very different than my father or where I grew up. And again, that was my journey and story. And I've learned so much since then. And I don't think we ever just figure out a money story and we're done with it. I think it's a lifelong journey. We're always uncovering new things. In the book, when I was writing the book, the chapter on it's about money, and it's not about money and all the deeper themes that come up. And one of them is power. I got so much more clarity around my relationship with my father just by writing the book. So to complete this, I think that, it's understanding and doing some exercises and journal prompts about what are our memories of earning money, what family, environment, class, lineage, how did that shape, our money stories and money dynamics and patterns, which ones are working today, how do we earn and spend and save and give and invest, and which ones feel healthy, which ones feel unhealthy, where do those patterns come from, are we repeating what we learned? Are we rebelling against what we learned? What decisions have we made? And starting to, unravel all of that, understand it deeper, so then we can start choosing different pathways, different patterns, and editing and rewriting some of those money stories into adulthood.
Yes, your story, it's like your beliefs about who you are, and your money story in particular, your beliefs about who you are, what money is, how it works, and how you are connected to it, what your relationship is with it. And then we tend to behave and make choices in alignment with that story. So if we say about ourselves like, oh, I'm irresponsible with money, we tend to act out that story, like at choice points in our lives. And for my audience in particular, I'm going to connect this to deschooling. Like the first chapter in the Sage Homeschooling book is deschooling, which is about like unpacking all of your educational baggage, about like what is learning. What are your earliest memories of like learning something? How do you learn things now? How do you think children should learn? Just like sort of unpacking all of that and breaking it all down so you can then build back up from start based on like evidence or information that we have, your intuition, based on these people that you're in partnership with. And I just want to invite all of my audience that I know is really strong and brave and insightful and courageous in doing that work to bring that into their money story as well.
Yes. When I started creating my methodology 20 years ago, I realized I had all these tools and practices that I learned in graduate school and our training to be therapists, wonderful tools. And they weren't applied to money, right? We talked about. And so when I was creating the methodology, I realized I have to bring all of these wonderful tools and mindfulness practices into a relationship to money as well. We already have the practices, just bring them over.
So all of that was like money healing, which is the first phase of your money work and the one I really wanted to lean into, but you have 2 additional phases as well. So what money practices do you recommend for those of us who are striving to live values-based lives?
Yeah, so one I already kind of mentioned, just a beginning money date, starting to, some of us need to schedule them weekly. Some of us can be more spontaneous. You really have to be honest of how do you create new habits and create patterns, right? We're all different. Some people like to do a money date every day at the beginning, 20 days, 30 days, just to get the habit, the pattern grooves going, and it could be as simple as really just what needs my attention around money right now. But what I mentioned earlier is the way that I used to do it for years and years, where when I finally learned how to do bookkeeping, it was a revelation, a revolution. It was mind blowing because, as I said, I wasn't good at math growing up. And so when someone sat me down and showed me how to use Quicken and Excel and then QuickBooks, and I always say, and then when I started training people, I would bring the box of tissue and the chocolate, right?
You had me at chocolate.
We need both, right? And so I had someone like gently, slowly training me how to do it. And it takes time to learn a new bookkeeping system. And we can talk about that for a moment. But it needs to have, for me, the candles. I lit candles every time I would do my bookkeeping practice. And every time I would go into my QuickBooks and I would enter new transactions, I had my candles going. I had my chocolate. I had my cup of coffee or tea. Sometimes I had music. Sometimes I didn't. And I set the space so that it was more sacred for me. And I brought a mindfulness practice to sitting down to do bookkeeping, Yeah. And that's how I did my own bookkeeping for well over a decade, every day, every few days, because every day, every few days you're spending money, It's all online now, but I used to save all my receipts and bring them home and enter them, So that was one way that I would have a money date. But bookkeeping's just part of it, Yeah. It's also just giving your space to journal about the money healing, right? Because as I said in my program, it's 3 phases. It doesn't mean once you're done with money healing, you're done, and then you move on. But the money healing work, once you do a few months of that, I can't say I guarantee because that's not how I think, but so many people who do some of the deeper healing work and practice the tools, once they get to the bookkeeping, they're way more ready. They're way more excited. They're way more able, to, even if they're going to sit with a financial planner. In the past, that would have just overwhelmed them. They would have been checking out, or their breath would have been up in their, throat. Is that they go to the financial planner, they have the body check-in tool. They know how to check in with their body. They know how to calm themselves down. They know how to do some self-talk of, okay, I may not understand everything that this person is saying, but I've come with some new questions, or I may be able to say, hey, can you slow down? Or can we take a little break? Or can you say that again in a different way? So it's just a whole different thing once you've done some of that healing work. You don't walk into, well, shame can keep you from even making that appointment or even reaching out to a keeper, right? So once you have the tools and have moved through that, then you're so much more ready for the practical. And so here's another thing. So money dates are, can be 30 minutes a week. And as I was starting to go into, it could be journaling about your family's money history. It could be, with a couple money date. I don't ever go to the numbers first. I always have story time. Like, no two people ever do money in the same way: earning, spending, saving, giving. Everyone has really different styles and opinions on whose style is right and best. And so I don't even go into, let's talk about the numbers yet. The first money date I have for couples is story time. What are memories, positive and negative? What did you learn from your family? What are you embarrassed of? What are you proud of? And on and on. So money dates can really be just journaling or having a new kind of money conversation with someone that you trust, And the last thing I'll say about the money practices is that you have to craft them so it works for you. It's not a rigid dance. It has to be flexible. It's a dance. So you're, constantly fine tuning, upgrading. I am, all these years later. And one of the ways that I directly bring values into our money practices, and I started doing this from day one, is because I started noticing financial planning community was, really into socially responsible investing. And there was so much talk about earning in accordance with your values and investing in accordance with your values and I was like, I want spending,
Yes.
and earning. And so I came up with, well, let's rename your categories, your expense categories. Let's rename your bookkeeping categories so that when you sit down at your bookkeeping, this is just another way to make it more meaningful or more creative or playful, and to add in you into, connect it even more with how you earn and spend and save. And so when you sit down at your bookkeeping, your chart of accounts, we won't go into that, but it's just the bones of any bookkeeping system. And you look at the names of your categories, you can rename them. Like, there's nothing wrong with rent or mortgage. Some people like to stick with those names, and other people say, okay, I want to change these up. That would actually be really fulfilling and satisfying for me. And so you can rename everything. So rent or mortgage could be home or sanctuary or love shack, and or it's like, and that's just more a lighter one, but it goes deeper, like renaming a debt instead of that damn debt. It's, this debt came from medical bills. And, a gentleman talked about his wife having cancer and surviving and making it through, and their debt was because of that. And so he renamed his debt to honor his wife and their life together, and that they have more time. And, he said he was a traditional accountant, which, this is pretty out there, but he just renamed it. And I can't remember what it was, but it just shifted the energy. It shifted how we related to paying it down, or it could be like someone has a debt from taking a trip to Italy that really significantly changed the course of their lives in a more positive way, or really changed them, So there's so many, it's like debt is not just debt. It's something was going on. There was some curveball or crisis or big life change. So let's rename it to honor that, And I do a lot of more work around how to incorporate the values into the bookkeeping, and that's in the book as well, and exercises. So, you can just look at your main categories right now and rename them all, based on something more creative or playful or more meaningful, to you. And And that doesn't have to go to your accountant. This is personal finances.
Yeah.
This is just for you. So, and then it's, of course, at the end of each month, then I would want you to get into the practice of reviewing, what's working, what's not, where are you in alignment with your values, where are you off, what are some next steps there?
So many simple yet fun and powerful tips there. Even the renaming the budget one, I love that. I can see how powerful that can be, and also like fun and creative, which it's always nice when you can infuse some like fun creativity into money stuff, which a lot of people, their story is that it's not fun and it's not creative.
Oh, that was my story. Oh, yeah. Like, this is the most boring, dry, dull part of being a human, mundane. And there's nothing interesting or, significant. Or, anyway, yes. Yeah. So
yeah, we're using this to make meaning, people.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so your final phase is money maps. Can you explain what money maps are?
Sure. So in a nutshell, it's just another way of saying budgeting, but I've never liked the word budgeting, and most people don't, but it's a fine word. And again, I don't like rigid budgeting, just like I don't like rigid dieting. Although I know if you're having a health crisis, you may have to alter your food, right? But for the most part, I want something more flexible. And so part of this whole phase is, creating a money map, and we like to do it in 3 tiers. And it's coming up with first just defining what these 3 tiers are as a concept. So how do you define bottom line, basic needs, lifestyle? The second tier is comfortable. So how do you define comfortable lifestyle? The third tier is ultimate. So how do you define ultimate as a lifestyle? And then going back and actually putting the expenses and the numbers with it. So you can see what bottom line basic needs adds up to, and if you would move to comfortable, what would be added in there? Would that be donating more, your debts paid off, in the past, traveling more, dining out more, right? It's really changed. An ultimate. So what's amazing though is that it's different depending on what life phase you're in. Where you are now is different than 5 or 10 years ago, or where you'll be in 5 years. And it's also like how we define these is totally different based on where we live, backgrounds, where we are in the world, ages, so on. So my comfort level could be someone's ultimate could be my, comfort,
Yeah.
and so on. So it's just an exercise, but it's also a way to really see where you are and be real with that. And then also where you're heading. And, because this is a really important concept to me, especially in COVID. We all, none of us could have planned this, even if we're great planners, even if we have a 2-year, 5-year plan, right? Curveballs happen in life, and they happen in money. And in a long life, we're going to have ups and downs and ebbs and flows in life and in money. And, so some years we are earning more and, donating more and saving more. And some years we're not doing that. It's a completely different scenario. We, are maybe just, trying to stay above water and everywhere in between, right? Or going into some debt during a transition. So there's a whole spectrum here, right? And I think we're taught like we're always supposed to be growing as a business owner, but I don't believe in that. When I can talk more about when I had my child and I simplified, instead of growing. And that was a very intentional choice. So just to complete this little money map thing, it's really just getting clear on what tier you're at, where you want to be heading, honoring where you are now. And it is like a little budget, and then that goes back to the money practices of what I said, checking in monthly, seeing where you're at, what's working, where you went over, where you went under, and there's so much more to the money practice. But money maps are also for me about, how do you make good money decisions, as we talked about earlier, and creating a set of questions that you can bring when you're shopping, when you're in the consignment store, when you're going to buy a car, and so on. So there's a lot more to money maps, but that's a little bit of what it is in a nutshell.
Well, you are a fellow mamapreneur, so I'm curious how your business evolved when you became a mother. Let's lean into that. Let's go there.
Okay. Yeah. So one of my favorite things to talk about is business models. We haven't even gotten here,
I love it.
I love it because, as a mom, as a, however it is, the equation for me has always been time, money, energy, family, and health. Those are the 5 things, and I don't have it broken down into 15% here,
Yeah.
my life every decision needs to be based on that, but those are the 5 things I'm always considering. Even before I had my child, and it was me and my husband, and every Saturday that was like our time. We weren't working. We had dates all Saturday. The entire day was a date. That's obviously changed. But so, business models for me, it's never been like, I want to make this much money, therefore I'm going to do this. It's what kind of life and lifestyle,
Yes.
right? Do I want to have? And yes, what does my personal house need? And then what does my business need to do? But it was always based on the time, money, energy, family, health, right? So I've had 5 different business models in my last 20 years, and I'm moving into my 6th. And they always changed when something wasn't working anymore, or when I would want to get to a next level, So by the time I had my son, as I mentioned, 4 months shy of my 40th birthday, I was in a great business model for almost 4 years. I had a business partner. She was an excellent financial coach and had a full private practice, of private clients. I was great at teaching groups and teaching my methodology and giving that initial talk of what the methodology was to inspire people. And they would come in, and then I would say, oh, go over here to my bookkeeping trainer. I had a team of bookkeeping trainers under my umbrella, and then a team of financial coaches under our umbrella with my business partner and I. And then I taught my groups like crazy. It was wonderful. It was a great business model. And it was a huge improvement from the one before. The one before was when I was a solopreneur, which was how I began, how many of us begin, and great for a while, until I couldn't get through this threshold. And I was stuck at an amount of money, but it also, I didn't know how to leverage. Like, I was doing time versus time, I was,
Yeah.
And even though I was doing little groups, anyway, so I just couldn't get past this money ceiling. And by bringing in a partner and having a team underneath us and getting a percentage of that, that brought us to a new income bracket. And so it was a great business model, and then because of a complication that I had in my labor, I had a placenta abruption. And it's the one thing the midwives can't see happening, right? And I was home trying so hard to get in that water, and I couldn't because I wasn't dilated. And after like 13 hours of immense pain, I said, we're going to the hospital. I put on my orange sundress and was like, we're going to the hospital. I was swearing all over the place, And we got there, and within a half an hour, I did hemorrhage, and that's when the abruption finally happened, and I did have to go into emergency C-section. And I'm so grateful that I made the call. I couldn't get into my body. I could not get into my body, and so I knew something was wrong, even though I had never been there before, So I'm actually really grateful for the hospital, of how it turned out. I know we all have our own stories of that, and have to come to peace. But what happened afterwards was that I needed recovery time. And I thought that I was just going to continue on with the business model, as it was. And I couldn't. I needed to be home. I needed to be recovering. And within a month, me and my partner, in the most honorable way, and it took a few months to do it, but we decided to part ways. And I decided to let go of my entire business model and go back to a one-woman show in one fell swoop. And, after I was working probably 50, 60 hours, 40 to 60, because I loved it, and had so much energy in my 30s. And I had to ask myself a completely new set of questions, like what can I do while recovering, while sleep deprived, while health challenged. And I came to, what can I do in 10 hours a week? And what can I do that's the most lucrative in those 10 hours that I love doing and that will bring in the most amount of money? And that happened to me be my group programs. And I was able to then do it twice a year with about 50 people at that time. And that's what I could do, and said no to everything and everyone, and no to tea dates, and pick my brain sessions, and no, and learn how to be outrageously productive in 10 hours until my body healed and we got through those first few years and had to really simplify everything. And, my husband used to call it maximum lockdown. And that may sound a little intense, but we would initiate maximum lockdown. And now it's more playful. And now it's more like we're not at maximum lockdown, but we're in a partial cash flow dip. So let's just not do the extras right now, And so we have playful language about it. And also it's okay when we say we're in partial lockdown, just we're not going to do the extras during this cash flow dip because we still have them at different points in the year,
Yeah.
And so during that time, we definitely had to do more of that. And I had to keep having conversations with myself. This is a transition. We're in an ebb. The biggest important thing to me and priority right now is being a mom and getting my body healthy again. That's priority. And, it's not an increase in income or increase in donation year or for the first couple of years when he was little. It was really not that, And then it took a few years until I recovered and then moved into the next business model. Yeah. And that's when I moved into the year-long program.
Okay.
And I've had that model for 8 years, going on 9.
Oh,
And
wow.
and just to say one last thing, because I think this is important. There was a point when my son was 3 when we were having an enormous cash flow dip. My programs, I was having a hard time registering 50 people. I would get 41 or 42 and sometimes 50, but it was feeling really stressful. And then my husband decided to launch his own programs of how to teach online. And it was terrible. I do not recommend to parents of a young child trying to, launch a program. I would finish launching, he would. But by the end of the year, we could tell we were in dire straits. Like something needs to shift here in our business models. They're not working. And we went to live with his parents for a month over the holidays. And we didn't know if we'd have to stay for 6 months or a year, and live with them. My husband was like, absolutely not. I'm like, I'm open, it was his parents. I'm open. But it was the Midwest, where we both grew up. And just to complete the story, in that month, because we had so much childcare around the clock with the grandparents, we were able to vision a sale on my programs. I retired them, but did a big sale, which brought in a chunk of cash to help us through that month. And then in that moment, my little team envisioned, why are we trying to do 3-month programs? Like, it's really time for a year-long program. And that's when we opened it, lowered the pricing a little bit, and went from pulling teeth to get 50 people, and was able to get 320 people in the first year.
Wow.
And that's the model, my year-long program that I love the pacing of, and that we've been doing for 8 years so well. And then I'm moving into a shift. So you see how something isn't working anymore on some level, or you want to get to a next level, or you have a baby and you need to shift your priorities, right?
Yeah.
And the time, the energy, family health, configuration needs to shift. And so it's not a static thing, business models.
Yeah, we can sometimes get stuck in the mindset that staying the same is success. Like that happens a lot in couples. It's like, no, we need to hold on to exactly who we are today to have a successful marriage. And a lot of people bring that to business too before they have kids. It's like, no, I need to like just double down my efforts and make this work because this is what success looks like. So I love that, like embracing the evolution and being open to it. That's like a huge thing. I also love that piece of minimalism that you bring in. I know you don't specifically use that word, but that's one of the values for this podcast. And that's sort of my language for describing the things you're talking about, where you're like Pareto principle style, like you're focusing in on the 20% of effort that returns 80% of, the benefit that you get out of it, and just continuing to sort of dial in on that. Like, where am I getting the most fulfillment? What's giving me the biggest return? And then being really like brave enough to let go of a lot of the other stuff and to just embrace that evolution.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, now you mentioned your son, so let's talk a little bit about that. Because as homeschoolers, we being our children and as a family, we take ownership for the education, and that includes financial literacy. So how do you support a healthy relationship with money for your son?
Yes, and I want to say my family just moved into homeschooling.
No,
this
of course.
year.
COVID,
Yeah, this year. Well, he was in a Montessori small school, a private school from kindergarten through 6th grade, and that was great. And then he wanted to move to public school for middle school, but because of COVID, it went virtual. And so he was starting virtual classroom, in public school. So many factors did not work.
Yeah.
And he's been asking for homeschooling for years, actually. And we're finally doing it. I'm not kicking myself because but we are such a homeschooling family, and we're not a homeschooling family that follows any curriculum. We are totally making up our own curriculum.
Self-directed learning. Yeah. That's my jam.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Finally, so at 12 we have arrived here, and so
welcome.
Okay, thank you. It really suits us so much more, than even the Montessori private school, even though we had wonderful teachers. So, we have been talking about money with our son, since he was 3 or 4, in age appropriate ways. I can remember when he was little and we would go to Target and he wanted everything, maybe he was 2 or 3. He wants it all.
Yeah.
And so we just went through the aisle and put everything on his wish list. And that was that. And then I remember being in Nordstrom Rack when a year or so later, and he wanted many shoes. And we picked out 2 pairs of shoes, and I think we narrowed it down to the 2 out of 3. And I remember having conversations with him. Which ones do you love the most? Which ones do you think you'll wear? Just little questions that are related to money, needs, wants, desires, choosing. So in going from the wish list of you can have everything, right? So that for that age to the next age of let's talk about needs and wants and desires. And we're going to get 2 out of these 3 or 5, or, I think it was 2 out of 3. And then, and then I remember talking about the jars of the save, spend, donate. And that never fully worked for a family to have jars, just, we had to find our own version of that. So kind of though, but I remember there was one year where he was saving up for a big Lego set. And he went to the grandparents and said, if I save up this much, will you contribute the equal amount? So he's always been a negotiator.
Nice. Getting the match.
He got the match from both sets of grandparents after he saved for, 9-10 months, and then was able to get this big Lego set. So, he learned that. We've had discussions about donations. Where as a family we want to donate. He's chosen to donate a few places that were important to him. He heard stories of other kids that were going through hard things, and he wanted to donate. So it's always kind of been like that. The last thing I'll say is, as he gets older, he's for years now been asking us how much we make. And, you know, right away, I didn't want to tell him the number, because the number without the larger picture and the details of what our monthly expenses are, what the breakdown is, you know, just felt irresponsible for me to tell him. And so we would sit down as a family and talk about what our expenses are, you know, over the month. Not all of them, but again, age appropriate. We gave him more information. He's getting close to being able to see our full budget. You know, I think he can now. You know, we're getting close to either I'm going to teach him QuickBooks or my mom is. And so, you know, that was important. So it felt like he really wanted to know that number, but I didn't think he had the full capacity to understand that and comprehend what that meant. And I felt like he might just throw that out to his friend, and not to be secretive, but I think you have to be mindful of what you share and how you share it, you know? So I do have conversation with him, like, let's not share the number of our income with friends, right? At this point, I just think that there are a lot of assumptions can be made in all different directions. Let's talk more about what that number really means and what our expenses are. And also we talk with him. In the past, my business model with my year-long program, we would open twice a year. That's what I'm changing next year. And so happy I'm never launching again. You know, and I had my last launch last month, and I'm so happy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we're moving into more evergreen hybrid, where
Love it.
you don't have to wait 6 months, you know. But what our son would learn is that during those periods, like maybe leading up to it, we had you know, we were in not a cash flow dip, but we just had to be more mindful of the extras. And then whenever we would have a registration period, he knew at the end there would be a celebration. He tracks he tracks our sales. He was also tracking the electoral votes, you know, as well. He learned about that. So he was tracking the sales. And then we each get a box of chocolate of our choosing at the end of registration. Nice. Anyway, so we you know, talk with him and teach him, and in what we think in age appropriate ways. Are we perfect? No. Are we hitting everything? No. But he's learning way more than either of us learned growing up, and we're pretty open about most things, but we try to be mindful of, is this age appropriate? And, you know, we don't tell him every single detail, but we share more and more as we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I get asked this question a lot, and so I've talked about it a fair amount. I think first and foremost, like, you doing your work around money is like step one of helping support your kids having a healthy relationship with money. Just like, you know, step one of helping your kids having a healthy relationship with food is like to do your own work around having a healthy relationship with food. So like all the things we've talked about so far in this conversation, like that would be the first thing for helping your kid have a healthy relationship with money. I think another tip that I think is helpful is we're big on freedom here in this community, and like to give your kids freedom and ownership. We talk about like letting them like own their educational journey and all that stuff too. And the same with money. So like let them own their money, like let them make mistakes with it. That's how they have to learn, like natural consequences. Let them own their part of the journey. And then also I think giving them a seat at the family at the table, so to speak, giving them a position in the family economy. That is probably the thing that my kids would say has been most impactful for them. My kids are now 15 and 12 and 8. And so if there's something that they want to do, like, hey, can we take a trip to, I don't know, can we go back to Hawaii? Like, okay, let's sit down and see if we can make that happen. And so they like, as they ask for things, or as they ask questions, or as they have desires or interests, we give them a seat at the table, so to speak. So here's how much that we had set aside for travel this year. Like if we want to take another trip, okay, where are we going to take that money from? Like if we're going to say yes to this, what other things would you guys like to say no to in order to make that happen? So Just sort of giving them a seat at the table, so to speak, as opposed to just like a yes or a no answer, I feel like has opened the door to so many learning opportunities with our kids around money.
I couldn't agree with you more on both of those points. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so let's move into our Q&A. I asked the Sage family community what questions they had about the art of money, and Shelka asks what to do when your partner refuses to talk about money. Money can be a real struggle between couples, and I recommend listening to episode 37 of this podcast on peaceful partnership, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what advice you have here for couples who aren't aligned in their money values and practices and just are feeling friction there.
Yeah, well, that's most couples I know, like that's most couples I know. Really, we're not on the same page, or we, as I mentioned earlier, we have completely different styles. We really all earn and spend and save and give and invest in different ways, right? Yeah. And, if we don't learn new ways, the first thing is we're horrified by the way someone else does things different than us. We're horrified that they spend differently than us. We may even have the same values on the surface, right? For a while, I wasn't horrified, kind of, I just was like, I don't understand. My husband's really into bikes and cycling. And I was like, that's so expensive, Yes. And he doesn't understand my whole acupuncture, massage, facial lotion thing, And we had to really sit down and share why these values are so important to us, what they give to us. And, we've had so many conversations about that. And then there was one year where we added up 2 years of all of my self-care expenses, including facial lotion, and his cycling, his bike. And I don't know, it was almost identical. I don't know if it was 2 years of my stuff or, but it was like, okay, we spend money differently. We just spend it differently, right? But if it works, if the finances work out, which they do, we also, I think, go to our partners, like when we get a credit card bill and see that they've spent in a certain way, and we may go running to them while they're in the middle of something or in the shower, or we bring it up right before bed. 90%, 95% of conversations in bed around money don't work. No. Sometimes they do, but for the most part, just don't go there, right? So these are there's just a lot of that. I had one student who said she just goes to her partner and says, is now a good time to have a money conversation? Brilliant, right? Mm-hmm. Is now a good. So how do you go about doing things differently? When I'll answer the way I do money dates, but first I want to say, whenever people come to me and say they're thinking about doing my work, but they don't have a interested partner, I always say, you do the work first. Mm-hmm. You do it first, similar to what you were saying and what I always say too about your children. You need to learn it first as the parents. They're watching everything, and then they'll learn from you, Mm-hmm. So if you're having problems around money and you don't have a willing partner, then you go learn about money. You go learn about your own patterns and challenges and strengths, and you learn a bookkeeping system. Maybe you never thought before that you could ever do one. You can, there's one right for you. I had a couple where he came from a financial background, and so was always pulling out the spreadsheets. Like, come on, and she was like, I hate those things, put those away. And he was like, what's the matter? I know all of this. I learned it. I'm the right teacher for you. I'm going to show you how to do it. And she just would shut down. So the first step in a money date with couples, as I mentioned earlier, is you have story time. And, even in that story time of sharing, not about money, and maybe this person won't even do this, mm-hmm. But even just sharing one or two journal prompt of what do you remember from your family around money? Or what do you remember the first time you had a job and made your own money? Or what positive experience you remember about money, or what traumatic experience do you remember on money? Just even starting there is so different. That's how sometimes, that is how with couples, I teach them how to create a new kind of money date, and we start there first, right? Yeah. Now you do need a willing partner for that, but let me back up to say that if you don't have a willing partner, you learn. Please go forth and you learn, And I can't tell you how many times the partner, the spouse, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, starts looking at their partner going, what are you doing? Or something's different about you. Or you are able to come to them and talk about money or approach the subject completely differently than you were ever able to before. Or I have a couple that he hates the word money dates. He doesn't want those two words in the same, like vicinity, And so she just calls it like a money check-in or something, and they can only be 15 minutes. And he'll do that. Like, so he hated the word money date, hated that she kept asking for that. She, after doing work with me for a while, she was able to approach him in a different way that did work for him. And he agreed to having 15-minute little money chats or whatever they called it, And he was fine with that. The longer work of doing the bookkeeping, that was up to her. He didn't want to do it. She did. So she was the one to attend and learn a bookkeeping system. And it was incredibly empowering for her in her 50s to learn this for the first time.
Yeah.
And she knew what her numbers were. She never did before. And so she could come to him and, hey, say, what was this expense about? Without judgment, without a tone, or, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, just like she was able to approach it in a much more matter-of-fact way because she had spent a lot of time working on what are the emotions that come up for her and where did they come from and are they related to him? Maybe yes, maybe not. She did her own work. So that's one way of answering the question is like, go forth and do it yourself. And in 6 months, you may be able to approach your partner in a completely different way than you ever could before. And maybe they start talking, or maybe, you ask them a money memory, or, you ask them a question about money in a different way than you ever have before. And they suddenly become more available, more willing, and more interested, right?
Yes.
And then just to get back to the couple's money dates, the way I do it is simply is you have story time first. The second part of the money dates that may happen like a month or so later is you start talking about your values on the surface. What are they? They may be the same, but then how do you spend differently? And how do you feel about that? And, like the cycling self-care difference, all couples have it. So what is yours? Talk about that. Then the third step is who's on what? Like who is doing the bookkeeping? Who is paying the bills? One of you needs to be, right? One of you needs to be on that. And I think, I did our bookkeeping for, as I said, over a decade. And then literally one day my husband said, I'm going to learn Mint. And I was like, what? Wow, and he hated it at first. And then he used to be a daily meditator. And then he decided to pretend it was like daily meditation. And he was able to really get into it and enjoy it. But never in a million years would I ever have thought that he would have picked that up,
Yeah.
And so you just never know when the dynamic will shift and when they'll pick up, and start doing things and overseeing things. And so the third phase is, the third step is who's on what. And then the fourth phase is how do we really get on the same team in larger life goals and planning and visioning and all that. So those are just, 4 steps in how to go about having a couple money date in a new way. And it takes practice and time.
Yeah, that's helpful. Lots of helpful stuff in there. I think the one thing that I'll add is that specifically to this question of like the partner refusing to even talk about money, I suggest sort of starting with a dream talk and then reverse engineering your way into it. So like, what are your dreams in life? Like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? Like, where do you see us? Like, where do you want to be 20 years from now? Like, do you want to keep working this same job forever? Like, do you have some like big, bold, audacious dream? Just like sort of getting at those dreams. It's a way to get somebody to play ball. And then whatever that dream is, like, get on board with it. Like, I want to live on a sailboat. Like, okay, awesome. Like, let's look at that. Like, so what would that take to make that happen? Let's like start there. Okay, we're living on a sailboat. Where are we living in the world? Like, okay, great. What are we doing each day when we're living on that sailboat? Like, just paint the picture of that, whatever dream that they have, and then kind of work your way backwards from that. It's like, okay, so how much does a sailboat cost? Like what could we do to generate income while we're living on the sailboat? And just keep dialing it all the way back to like, okay, what are changes we can make today to shift our trajectory toward your dream, toward the dreams that we can get behind together. So I think just sort of starting with like, what are your dreams can help you back your way into conversations about money in the present.
Yes, I love that. You may find though with some people that's part of their skill set and they love dreaming. And for some people, it really scares them or they were told not to, and so what that's reminding me of, I love that you're, for some people though, that's going to be it. Like, let's talk about the larger dreams. My husband's a big dreamer and larger thinker, the last piece of this though, is that how we polarize in styles may just need to be, it may not be addressed right away, but just honored and acknowledged. So polarizing around couples is like one person is, the one who keeps track and is really hyper vigilant and knows where all the money is. And the other person just wants to stick their head in the sand. There's a reason that each of these patterns were developed, right? As we talked about at the beginning, how their money story was formed, all of that, right? Other people are like, I know everything. I'm the smarty pants about money. You don't know, the other one feels stupid because the other one has a finance degree, but even with that couple, he didn't know everything. When I taught him how to do a new kind of money date, he was like, oh, we never talked about money emotions, in my financial management and accounting classes, and so he had to learn that language, which was so helpful for him. She that was already her language, and she wound up choosing a totally different bookkeeping system than a spreadsheet to learn. She never went. So they had to they have very different styles. They were polarizing, and one person can't be the know-it-all or I know how to do this. You each have different styles. They need to be honored.
Yes.
And so that's really important too, is like, what are your different approaches around this? And no one's right. That was all formed for a very good reason. So how can you create a safe place to get under that, to name what each of you are, what each of your main roles or patterns are around this? And yeah.
I love that. So much of that, like over functioning, under functioning. I don't even like that language around it, but I tend to describe it as like when one person like leans so far forward, like the other person has no choice but to lean back. So
exactly.
Like, how can you like lean back a little bit so there's more space for your partner to take up more room? I love this. There's so much good stuff. Okay, let's move into our deep dive here. The show notes can be found at rachelrainbolt.com/podcast54, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what, Bari, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic? And of course, we'll have a link to the Art of Money book and your Art of Money program, but tell us all about it.
Okay, you want me to tell you about my work or other people's work that I love?
Whatever you would recommend.
Okay, so, yes, please come to my website, which is baritessler.com. I have a wonderful blog and a podcast, and my book that is in all forms, even in audiobook, which took 4 years to make that dream come true, and it just happened a few months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So there's all of that. I'm on social and I share money stuff, but I also just share lifestyle and my family and day-to-day mindfulness practices, and I love Instagram for that. I'm also on Facebook too. What else? The other thing to enjoy is I have a series called Money Memoirs, and my Money Memoir series interviews people from all different lineages and economic classes and income levels. A lot of them are my colleagues, because I love collaborating with bookkeepers and accountants and financial coaches and financial planners, and so I interview them, about their money stories and the good stuff, the hard stuff, the triumphs, how they overcame things. So that's a wonderful way to learn about my work, and that's on my website too, and that's a way to also meet some of my dearest colleagues.
I love it. Thank you so much, Bari, for being so generous with your wisdom and experience and time and joining me for this conversation today. I really appreciate it, and I really look forward to continuing to stay connected with you. I already follow you on Instagram. I'm already recommending your book to people. So just thank you for being you and putting everything out into the world that you do.
Thanks so much for having me.